Hi everyone, and welcome to the new Cloud Academy webinar. Today we have the pleasure to have with us Dwayne Monroe. He will be presenting a very great session, and he will talk about migrating workloads to Microsoft Azure the right way and securing your investment. Hi Dwayne, how are you today?
I'm all right. Hope everyone's doing well, and that we're ready to start. Thank you for the intro, Diego. And as Diego was saying, I will be talking today about moving workloads to Azure the right way, because as in anything in life, there is a right way, and there's definitely a lot of wrong ways. And also, once you've moved workloads to Microsoft's public cloud platform, what can you do to ensure that the assets that you've created there and placed there are secure? As you can see from the title here, I am a Microsoft Cloud Solutions Architect working for McGraw-Hill Education, which is a North America-based firm specializing in educational materials for universities and secondary education. The company made the decision to make the move to digital platforms, and that has opened up new opportunities and possibilities. I am on Twitter. I'm actually rather active there. There's my Twitter handle, and also you can feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn, where I'm also fairly active. And I encourage everyone to be very active on LinkedIn. It's a good thing to be. You'll notice from the verbiage there about what I do that I also, of course, have a great deal of experience and comfort with AWS, and that's, I think, an important point to make in general for all of my colleagues out there, that we live in a multi-cloud world, and so although I'm very much in Azure, or Azure, if you prefer, partisan, I do believe that you should have comfort and depth of knowledge with a variety of cloud platforms. So although I'm sure that everyone in the audience, or most of you, are already familiar with Azure, I was taught to never assume. So let's start with just a brief overview of what Azure is and why you should care about it. Now, according to Microsoft, Azure is a growing collection of integrated cloud services developers and IT professionals use to build, deploy, and manage applications through our global network of data centers. And you see the URL there that gives you more information about where that came from. And that's a good marketing document, or statement, I should say, and it's actually accurate, like all good marketing statements. But I'd like to simplify it a bit based upon my experience. Yeah, Azure is Microsoft's public cloud offering, but what it really makes possible, from my point of view, is the empowerment of enterprise IT to modernize, simplify, and cloud enable your existing deep investment in Microsoft-based infrastructure. The tools are familiar, but they're also very new. And this is an important point from my point of view, because many enterprise IT shops have a deep commitment to Microsoft technologies. You may have hundreds or thousands of servers, either bare metal or virtualized. And how do you modernize that? How do you modernize that legacy infrastructure that you have? Well, of course, you could move a lot of that to AWS. However, I think that for that infrastructural commitment, Azure presents a very compelling case. To make it even simpler and to visualize it, less effort spent treating this like a collection of beloved pets. Of course, it's a data center. I'm sure many of you out there have spent hours and hours upon hours wrestling with servers and data centers, so you know what I'm talking about. And by the way, you'll notice the URL at the bottom there. That's to an article, a fantastic article, that made the distinction, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with, between servers being treated as pets and servers being treated as cattle. A basic overview is that, in our traditional enterprise IT, we are compelled to treat servers as pets because all of our infrastructure, all of our services are based upon them, and we have to cherish them, because without them we don't have our business process. Whereas with cattle, as you know, they are not treated as pets, they are treated as a resource. So less time treating computing power as a collection of cherished pets and more time treating it as a utility. And this is the real power and the excitement of cloud computing. And I'll tell you that a number of years ago, I was a bit disillusioned with my career in information technology. I think I was burned out. Just many hours spent dealing with all sorts of issues in massive data centers and just being on call and just all sorts of challenges. And this was IT life, for most of us. But then cloud computing began to really take hold. And I think the first moment that I actually worked with AWS was when I had this glimmer of excitement that, oh, this is something very new and something that can reinvigorate my IT career. And then, of course, Microsoft stepped up with Azure, and that has been very exciting as well. So let's actually get into the meat of our topic here, which is migrating workloads to Azure, basic considerations and approaches. Because there's many different ways of doing this. There is no one perfect way of migrating a workload. And when I say a workload, I'm sure I'm thinking in terms of databases, storage, computational power. Now, of course, we can add things such as machine learning and artificial intelligence to the mix. There is no one perfect way. And I hope that at the end of this session, if there's one message that I can convey to you, it's that there is no perfect formula. There's a perfect formula for you and your organization and what your needs are. But there are principles that you can apply to the mission of relocating workloads to the cloud, to Azure, that should be adhered to. So here are some of the typical reasons for moving workloads to the cloud. Hardware obsolescence, of course, is a big issue. If you have worked in a large enterprise, you know that this can be a big problem. For example, many years ago, I was consulting for a large North American pharmaceutical firm. They had very deep pockets, as pharmas tend to have, and so purchasing lots and lots of hardware was not an issue for them. However, it was not unusual for them to spend literally millions of dollars and have a very large data center filled with hardware that in a relatively short period of time, or actually a shockingly short period of time, no longer could meet the demands that were being placed upon it by the scientific team, producing new drugs and so forth. So hardware obsolescence is a rather major issue for firms because, of course, you always need more performance. Capacity planning. If you are a person who has done data center capacity planning, you know that one of the big problems is under capacity and overcapacity. And overcapacity is a typical problem because you need to plan. For example, if you host an on-premises infrastructure for your web site and it happens to be very popular, it's global, how do you plan for traffic that could come from around the world and spike at certain times? However, the other issue is that much of the time that hardware may remain idle. So capacity planning, striking the right balance between over-provisioning and under-provisioning is a major challenge that is addressed by relocating workloads to the cloud, where things can scale and adapt in a way that is not easily achieved with on-premises technology. Another reason is increasing IT speed. I am sure that many of you have confronted in your professional life the questions from end users and departments of, we need something and we need it fast. And you are compelled to go through a provisioning process and review process and lots of bureaucratic hoops that you have to jump through to get the resources that people need. And then, of course, if you can't meet their need quickly enough, what do? Well, they go to shadow IT. They sign up for things on their own. And so moving key workloads to the cloud enable you to increase the speed at which you can respond to the demands and the requests of your end users, your clients really, your customers, for computing resources. Getting out of the data center business. Now, this is a big debate in our industry. You know, some people say in 10 years, no one will have a data center except for the cloud providers. Others say that's nonsense. However, everyone at this point wants to reduce their data center footprint. In addition to the costs associated with the hardware, costs associated with licensing of the software, the operating systems that run upon it, there's also power and cooling, all the related things of running your own data centers. It can be, of course, extraordinarily expensive depending upon the scale of your business. Azure makes it possible. Cloud technologies make it possible for you to reduce that footprint, to get out of the data center business as much as possible. Disaster recovery, of course. Earlier in my career, I worked for or rather consulted for a power concern in the United States. And they had created a rather elaborate disaster recovery center, and when we tested it, nothing worked because the hardware was obsolete and there were other issues. However, moving the disaster recovery function to Azure makes it possible for that disaster recovery infrastructure to be intelligently built, to be more nimble, and to be created and modified and tested in a way that with on-premises facilities is more difficult. And finally, on this list here, taking advantage of new opportunities made possible by cloud technologies, such as, for example, machine learning, which we'll get into. So, here are some key considerations that you should take into account when you are considering migrating a workload to the cloud, to Microsoft Azure. It is very important to know the environment into which you'll be placing your workload, upon which you're building your solution. Microsoft publishes the subscription and service limitations that help you to understand what your costs may be. You also need to make sure that the workload that you want to relocate to Azure is compatible with Azure services. You may have created a critical legacy application, something that is bespoke and that is key to your business and was built on premises and is running, and you want to cloud enable that. However, because of its dependency upon certain technology that may not exist within Azure, that may not be a good fit. Also, we spoke earlier about under and over provisioning as it pertained to the data center. Well, this is also applies, but in a different way, to your cloud assets. So, for example, it may be that you have 50 servers supporting a specific need in your data center, 50 physical servers. And if you are considering relocating that workload to Azure, you may not need 50 VMs, or you may need no VMs at all. You may be able to build that on Azure Functions. The key is to find the right solution to meet the business challenge. And I can't stress this enough, that you have to think in terms of the challenge and then find the solution that may exist within Azure to help you meet that challenge. So here are some of the standard migration options. Infrastructure as a service, or IaaS, in which you simply reinstall the workload onto infrastructural cloud-based servers. A lift and shift, which I think is popular with a lot of people in enterprise IT, although as serverless becomes more popular, I think that mindset will start to change. Microsoft provides a mechanism through which you can copy the virtual machine disks that you have on premises into Azure storage and then create virtual machines from them. That is an option. You can also use a tool such as Azure Site Recovery to synchronize your virtual machine disk copies into Azure and then failing those workloads over. This is actually a very clever method that I have used successfully, and I've seen others use quite successfully. And what you're doing there with Azure Site Recovery is you are creating a disaster recovery site, but the purpose of creating this disaster recovery site is really to relocate the workload. So platform as a service allows you to create, rather to recreate technologies or platforms. Well, actually, let me rephrase that using an actual example. So, for example, you have SQL Server, maybe SQL Server cluster installed on your within your data center on premises. If you were to relocate that that SQL workload to Azure SQL, as opposed to SQL Server installed on Azure virtual machines, then what you were doing then is you were creating a new target for your, as I phrase it there, continuous deployment and processes. And of course, another method is just simply to create entirely new solutions using Azure technologies. So now let's take a look at a project that I actually have been working on, and to use this as an example of how to relocate a workload from on-premises to Azure successfully. So let's dwell on this slide for a little bit. The production team within my organization produces books, physical books, as opposed to the digital content that the company also creates. The challenge for the production team is that they create many different sources of data, or they have many different sources of data. And this data is coming from different sources. For example, there's the manufacturing equipment, and there's sales, and other things that are part of the overall stream of data that is created related to the creation, the distribution, and the sale of books. Now, what the production team created as a kind of, how can I put this, a sort of ad hoc data analysis tool was, as you see here, the use of extracts from the various database sources into Excel spreadsheets and CSV files, very manual process, and then this data streamlined into SharePoint as a list, and then parsed using SharePoint lists and tools based upon SharePoint. Now, I think you can see from this simple diagram a lot of problems here. There are many manual steps, many points at which things can go wrong, and of course, SharePoint has its virtues, but it is not a business intelligence tool in the way that this particular team needed it to be. So this was definitely something that was rigged together to address a genuine need, which is we have different streams of data, and we need to bring that data together, and we need to parse the data to see exactly what's going on, to follow the life cycle of the book. Again, the existing infrastructure and the workflow around it is manual with too many moving parts. Siloed data platforms and analytics, as I mentioned, is very cumbersome and error-prone. How can you be certain with all of these moving parts, all of these pieces that have to be done through either scripts or right-clicking through GUIs and so forth, how can you be certain that you're actually getting good data? And as you can imagine, it's important that the data generated, that the results and the reports generated be accurate, because of course you want to know that your production of the item, the book, is the reports are accurate. You want to know that your sales are accurate. You want to know that distribution is being tracked accurately. You want to know that books that are in stores, the inventorying is accurate. Lots and lots of moving parts there. So we started a project to relocate this workload to Azure. The question was, in what form and using what service or services? And let me just dwell on this for a little while, because we're about to get into a key point. I don't want to rush through it. When you look at an existing infrastructure, as we see here, which obviously has all sorts of problems, there may be a temptation to simply relocate that to the cloud in its existing form. But Azure makes new opportunities possible. And so one of the key things that you need to do as you consider relocating a workload to Azure, whatever that workload may be, and in this case we're using SQL as an example, and I think a good one because it's a common or a widely used platform, is to open up your thinking, to reimagine what's possible, rather than say, I will simply, as the phrase goes, lift and shift what I've got into Azure. So we created a project plan, and this is really key. I cannot stress enough how important it is when you are relocating a workload to Azure to take seriously the need for a well-designed project plan. You will need it, because without it, there will be chaos, and also your investment in Azure may not be what it should be, because again, you're not necessarily taking advantage of the platform correctly, and you haven't examined what you have before you've relocated or begun the project of relocating that workload to Azure. So the first part of the project plan was to identify the need, and I know we all hate meetings, but meetings are key, and not just random meetings with the owners and users of the existing platform to see what their pain points are. You have to understand what the people who are using the existing platform need. You also need someone to be a champion. Microsoft uses the term champion, and I think it's a good one, because what you will find within every organization is that there are people who are, in general terms, whether it's Azure or AWS, Google Cloud, whatever the cloud platform may be, there are people who are very enthusiastic, as I am, as I'm sure all of you are, and then there are people who are not so enthusiastic. And the key part of the champion's role is to be the political liaison to management, to other parts of the technical infrastructure, to explain why this project is important and what the value will be once the project has been completed. Then you have to continually refine your understanding by listening to people. As a technologist, the temptation may be to simply just start teching the tech, as they say. But it is very, very important, in order for your cloud migration project to be successful, for you to listen to the end user, listen to the teams that are using the technology to make sure that you are creating the right fit. Partner with deeply skilled people. In my case, I had the pleasure of working with a Microsoft Azure technology solution professional, very skilled individual by the name of Toby Scales. Look him up on LinkedIn or Twitter. This is very important because you may have deep knowledge of your existing infrastructure. You may know that like the back of your hand. But the cloud is still very new, and although we are all very skilled and we are all very eager to learn, and many of us are already have a deep expertise, there are still things you may not know, opportunities that may not be obvious to you, like parts of the platform that do not appear to you, despite what you already know. So it is key, very important, to partner with individuals who eat, sleep, and breathe the platform. It is possible to create and critical to create a proof of concept environment within Azure, and this will be a playground for developers and for others to see what the platform can do. Evolve an approach that meets the need. Evolve an approach that meets the need. You are evolving your solution from on-premises into the cloud. You are not simply doing what some call a big bang. And again, it has to meet the need. It simply cannot be a technology for technology's sake. You'll notice that I'm repeating myself when it comes to these particular points, and I'm saying this because the technology aspect of this is, of course, important, but equally important, and in these early days of cloud adoption, perhaps more important, is to make sure that these workflow elements of the cloud migration are handled intelligently and patiently. And the seventh step there, the seventh line item there, baby steps. Do not be excessively aggressive. There's a temptation in many organizations to want to have wins and to want to have quick solutions, and for people to say, "Hey, I've got that done. It's on my report from my yearly review." This is that approach almost certainly guarantees the failure of your cloud migration project. Baby steps, logical steps are very, very important. Let me stress this again. Patience, careful planning, and a focus on solutions instead of tech for tech's sake, and avoiding the quest for a quick win are your keys to your success. I'll mention it again, that I mentioned patience. Yes, you will need lots of it. And not just to deal with the new technology challenges, but also the organizational challenges. You will face organizational challenges. There will be people who will resist. There will be people who will not want you to succeed. You should understand that, because cloud technology, many people see it as a threat to the way that they've been doing things for a very long time. So you should prepare yourself for these things. So let's take a look at the solution that was proposed. So after all of these things were done, the meetings and the meetings and the meetings again, and the refinements and the feedback, this is the solution that was proposed, and I think it's a fantastic one. Now you'll notice a few things here. You still have the existing on-premises infrastructure. However, now what we've done is we've created a gateway between the on-premises infrastructural elements and Azure. And so taking these data points here, or these data elements here, and then relocating, or rather migrating the data into Azure Data Factory, and the Azure Data Lake Store, we were able to do, and then of course utilizing Azure Data Lake Analytics, what we were able to do is create a method for presenting the data, analyzing the data in a way that liberated the on-premises infrastructure, or rather in a way that met the need of the customer. Let's actually spend a little time on this slide here, because these things can't go away immediately. That's an important point to keep in mind, that these on-premises data sources will not immediately go away. So what we've done is we've created a method for slowly but surely migrating that data here, because we're meeting the immediate need, which was analysis. Bear in mind, as we started this particular thread, that the fact that the data sources were disparate was one element of the challenge. But the biggest element of the challenge was that the production team was unable to actually analyze the data effectively, and that they were compelled to use what in this particular context was a suboptimal tool, that being SharePoint. Now, we still have these data sources for now. This is an interim step, but we're getting all of the data into Azure for analysis using the cloud-based analytical tools. So let's say that the solution acknowledges by design that on-premises data sources will persist for an extended time. Let's take a look at that again. These are not going away immediately. Remember, I mentioned the patience part. They will go away eventually, but not immediately. It creates a hybrid architecture that addresses the critical need, which is analytics. Now, recall that I mentioned a little while ago that it is important to listen to the end users. What the end users told us was that although they definitely want to do away eventually with the disparate data sources, that for example, the commitment to Oracle meant that Oracle wasn't going away anytime soon. and some of the other data sources were not going away anytime soon. So when we listened to them, what they told us was, we have to deal with that for the time being. However, what we do need desperately is robust analytics, and that's what this model provides them with. But it also provides, let me go to this slide again, it creates a method and infrastructure for eventually fully migrating the database workloads to the cloud in the future. In other words, by creating this infrastructure, by creating this linkage between the currently existing on-premises data sources and Azure, you can imagine, as we already have, the next step, which is eventually relocating all of this workload into Azure. So here's a really important thing to keep in mind. As I mentioned earlier, there was the organizational challenge of the disparate data sources. There was the fact that analytics was not being addressed in a logical or a robust or a reliable fashion, actually. And then a project plan was created to address that specific need, and then a design created, which is being put in place, to actually address the need. The key thing to keep in mind here is that the customer's need was met. And that's the key to having a successful cloud migration strategy, is that you're not trying to meet your needs specifically, unless you are the customer, which there'll be cases of that too. You're trying to meet the customer's need. Strategy, not technology, drives digital transformation. This is a very important point. All along, what we focused on here was strategy, not just the technology, because we could get into Azure Data Lake and Data Factory and those elements, and those are very interesting, but those things without a strategy would actually be useless. And if we simply rushed our way, we wouldn't have this, I think, actually very solid design. We probably would have settled upon an attempt to lift and shift, which simply wouldn't work and would be suboptimal. Strategy, not technology, drives digital transformation. That was a statement in an MIT Sloan Management Review article from July of a couple of years ago. It's very important because if you do not have a strategy, and I've seen this in different organizations, if you have the desire to relocate workloads to the cloud, but you do not have a strategy for accomplishing that migration, the migration will fail. It doesn't really matter how great the technology is. The migration will absolutely fail. So you have relocated the workload, excuse me, you relocated your workload or several workloads to Azure. How do you actually secure the workload? Well, fortunately, Microsoft several months ago created and released a tool set called the Azure Security Center. And what the Azure Security Center does is it provides a single pane of glass, as the saying goes, for securing your resources. So for example, let's go back for a minute. You see this infrastructure in Azure that we've created. You undoubtedly will have security concerns around that. We do. How do you actually analyze each of these elements to make sure that they are in fact secure and that the security posture of each of the elements is following best practices? Now, in the past, you would have to have queried or analyzed each element individually, but the Azure Security Center simplifies that process for you by, as I said, creating a single interface. So let's take a look at this video. This is from my own sort of POC Azure infrastructure. What you're seeing here is the Security Center actually analyzing the sort of modest group of virtual machines and one SQL PaaS database that I've created, and giving me recommendations regarding those resources. This is extremely powerful. This is extremely powerful, and this is the kind of thing that I think people have sought after in on-premises environments for quite some time. There have been various attempts at doing things like this. Some of them have been successful, such as Open Insight and using Nessus and things of that nature. But your cloud investment may have a tendency to sprawl, even if you're right-sized, even if you're doing everything correctly. If it's a great success, it will sprawl, and so keeping things secure will become a challenge. You'll notice here that within, let me just pause this video for a second. You'll notice here that within the Security Center, you have an overview of everything that that Security Center can see, and then specific information about virtual machines and cloud services. A virtual machine, of course, as you all know, would be a VM, for example, a Windows host or a Linux host that you created within Azure. And your cloud services would be, for example, SQL Server PaaS or an Azure Functions built application. So what Security Center gives you the ability to do is to take a look at what the security concerns are for each of these important elements, or the resources that you've created within Azure. Now, of course, this is not, there isn't a lot of information here because, of course, this is just a small POC that I use for creating various ideas, playing around and so forth. But you'll notice, let me just pause this again, that it's showing, I'll go back for a little bit, that's showing my two Ubuntu servers, and it's giving me notifications regarding those particular servers. And you can imagine that if I had many, many different VMs, that would be extremely helpful. And with the overview, which you see in the business intelligence graph here, it gives you an overall view of what your vulnerabilities are. And then, of course, you can dive in more deeply and see exactly what the issue is with that particular host. Let's take a look at the SQL database I've created. There are a number of SQL databases. PaaS databases, these are not databases that are hosted on VMs. These are our PaaS databases. So again, the Security Center, as I've written here, consolidates security analysis and recommendations into a single interface. And in a production environment, I have found this to be extremely helpful because if you have many, many different elements, it can become very challenging to make sure that everything is secure. I think this is one of the best things that Microsoft has done for Azure. The Security Center's capabilities are divided into tiers. The free tier is automatically enabled on all Azure subscriptions. And this, I'm quoting Microsoft here. The free tier provides visibility into the security state of your resources, basic security policy, recommendations, and integration with products and services from partners such as antiviruses, anti-malware, and so forth. The standard tier, however, adds advanced threat detection capabilities, such as threat intelligence, behavioral analysis, anomaly detection, incidents, and so on. And it is free for the first 60 days of its use. As many of you may know, the world of anti-malware, anti-phishing, and other attempts to intercept the actions of bad guys is evolving from the interception of signatures and other things that we've been using for quite some time to behavioral analysis. And with the standard tier, you have the ability to have the Azure Security Center take a look at the behaviors, the access behaviors, and the overall behavior of your assets within Azure and provide you with alerts regarding things that seem anomalous. And this, of course, is not unlike what, say, your credit card company, does when, let's say, you've never been to Gibraltar and all of a sudden there's a charge on your credit card from, Gibraltar, and you get a phone call from the credit card company. Well, it's of course that sort of behavioral analysis based upon machine learning that is applied to your Azure resources if you opt for the standard tier, which I think is actually well worth it. Or to put it another way, the free tier discovers and reports on system and platform vulnerabilities that IT has traditionally addressed, whereas the standard tier leverages new developments, as I said earlier, in machine learning and analytics to protect your cloud assets in a broader and more, quote-unquote, intelligent way, which, as I said, is really the direction of anti-malware, anti-spam, anti-phishing. And as I said, the standard tier is free for 60 days and is very well worth investigating. Look at the URL you see there on your screen to learn more. I think that once you choose the standard tier, you'll be hooked on it, and you will make a compelling case for opting for it. Just recently, Tom Schinder, who is Microsoft's program manager for Azure Security and Engineering, discussed Azure Security Center and other elements of Azure Security on the Doppler podcast, which I heartily recommend to everyone. It's a fantastic session with Tom. Tom talks about Microsoft's approach to protecting your assets within Azure, and it is assumed breach, which I think is a relatively new way of thinking about securing computing assets. Basically, assumed breach, I'm sure many of you are familiar with it, but assumed breach means that rather than spending all of your time building walls to keep bad guys out, which of course we still must do, but rather than focusing all of your energies upon that, you must assume that someone will be clever enough to breach your walls, as happened just recently with DocuSign, and we're all familiar with what happened with the WannaCry malware just recently. You must assume that someone will eventually be clever enough to breach your system and develop methods for discovering those breaches and minimizing the damage. This is why the machine analytics and machine learning and the analytics is so key, because of course an intruder's behavior is likely to be anomalous compared to the normal behavior of your applications and your end users. Tom makes the point in the podcast that the average intruder is in your system for, I think, a week or so before any action is actually taken, and that his team's goal has been to reduce that to a matter of a day or two at the most. I think what's really important here is something that you can use as a business case for locating or relocating workloads to Azure, is that the amount of effort and the power of the technology being deployed to protect the assets that have been relocated to Azure is, I'm going to say, orders of magnitude greater than what you probably can do within your own data center, no matter how good you are. You simply cannot dedicate the amount of resources to the problem of protecting your assets that Microsoft and other large cloud providers can. And that's one of the reasons why I think that one of the most compelling cases for relocating workloads to Azure is the security case. There are those who have concerns and who feel that perhaps Azure is, and cloud in general, is less secure. I know that was one of the stories that people were telling up until very recently. But in my experience, I find that it is much more secure when properly configured. And it is really good to know that you have individuals like Mr. Schinder and the Azure security team working very hard to deploy very powerful technologies to give you the tools you need to protect your assets. I also highly recommend to you a review of the steps that Microsoft itself took when it started relocating workloads from Microsoft data centers into Azure. Tom wrote an article about this called The Cloud Security Mindset, and you can get it from that URL. It is an excellent, excellent paper. And I think it also provides a great guidance for any cloud migration project. Certainly, I keep this information foremost in mind when I'm thinking about cloud migrating workloads to the cloud. And as the title of that tells you or suggests to you, you have to have a security mindset going into every single project. And by the way, there will be multiple projects to relocate. There will be no one single, we're going to relocate everything to the cloud. There'll be multiple cloud relocation projects within your organization. And each and every one, I think, should be informed by what Tom calls the cloud security mindset. Microsoft used it themselves, used these methodologies themselves to successfully relocate their workloads to Azure, because, of course, as the saying goes, you need to eat your own dog food. And I'm very impressed with the work that they've done. So I encourage you, if you have not already done so, and even if you have access to a production Azure platform, I encourage you to have your own playground, to familiarize yourself. Cloud Academy has many good courses, as you know, and it is key for you to have your own platform, a place for you to learn, to break things without worrying about it, to try out all the various ideas, and to master the technology. As you can see, there's the URL. We're going to Microsoft's website for actually signing up for a free account. You get a $200 credit, and of course you also will get, I found, you'll get a phone call from Microsoft asking you what you need, which is actually quite nice. They are working very hard to encourage people, regardless of the size of the organization. You don't have to be a multinational. You can be a small firm. They are working very hard to encourage organizations to relocate to whatever extent possible their workloads to Azure, and they are working very hard to make it as easy as possible and to give as much information and guidance as is possible. So yeah, absolutely, take advantage of the free Azure account and kick the tires, as the saying goes. So for your time and for your attention, and I think we're ending a little early here, but that is the presentation, and I guess we're open to some questions.
Among the available cloud technologies, what is exciting about to choose Azure to be the best platform to migrate?
So I would say that Azure is the best platform to migrate to, in my opinion, for those workloads that are Microsoft centric. So in our example from the presentation, for example, you saw that with the exception of the Oracle database, everything within the on-premises environment was Microsoft-based. And so Azure provided the most compelling case. And also, I think it was the simplest method available to us to analyze that data and to get that data into the cloud. Let me say something else about that. The question of what is the best cloud platform to migrate onto, I would rephrase that a bit, because I don't think there really, of course I love Azure, but I don't think there is one single best cloud platform. What there is the best cloud platform for a particular workload or set of workloads. I think that that open-mindedness is very important to make sure that your cloud migration is successful, because we are in the multi-cloud world. My organization, for example, has a very heavy investment in AWS, but also a heavy investment in Azure. So the right tool for the right job.
We have another question. What are the basic considerations I need to concentrate on before migrating my application infrastructure from on-premise to a cloud environment like Azure? Any suggestions?
So the first thing I think that you should take into account is your application compatible with the services that are available on Azure. So for example, let's say that your application was written on an earlier version of Windows, or it's calling upon binaries that are not necessarily supported. That's something that you need to explore. And the best way to explore that is, as I mentioned a little earlier, is to actually build a proof of concept. Just try it out. Do not commit to moving production code from on-premises to Azure before you have done the POC. And you can do that, for example, if you're working for a firm, you can do that by opting for the free Azure account with your $200 credit, and then try it out, see what happens. Also, if you do not have a connection with an Azure specialist, I certainly recommend that you do that to help you make the most of the experience.
And why didn't you use ExpressRoute for faster transfer?
The reason why ExpressRoute wasn't used was, I would say, more political than technical. Obviously, ExpressRoute would be the optimal method and the fastest. However, in order for that to work, you have to have the cooperation of the network team. And not that they weren't cooperative, but their cooperation, would take longer than this particular team needed. And actually, this gets back to what I was talking about earlier about bureaucracy, which is an important consideration when it comes to your cloud project. Bureaucracy is a big issue, and also meeting the need. So yes, absolutely. Our preference was for ExpressRoute, but ExpressRoute was not available fast enough. Now, eventually, of course, it will be put in place, but to meet this immediate need in a timely fashion, having to wait for all the different gears of the organization to turn to support that, we opted for this particular design.
Another interesting question here. Should infrastructure as a code be implemented in the very beginning of a cloud implementation plan, or is it part of the later phase?
That is a really good question. I think it depends upon what the demands of your code are. So my preference is that is to move directly to an infrastructure as a code solution. That's the preference. But again, you have to take into account what your environment, and by environment I don't just mean the technical aspects, but also the organization itself, what the organization has a tolerance for. So if there's a greater comfort level with an interim step of like for like, from on-premises to the cloud, then that's what you should do. If, however, there is an openness to and a willingness to experiment and to make that move, then absolutely, a move from things that are built upon, say, VMs to Azure Functions, I think would be preferable. That definitely is the longer term, I think, direction of our industry as a whole.
How much additional overhead can be expected when implementing a multi-public cloud strategy? Is it wise or not worth the extra time and cost?
This is a really, really important question. Very important question. I was just reading an article recently, I think from Cloud Technology Partners, about people being blindsided by unexpected costs. Because the expectation is that, oh, well, I have less or no physical infrastructure anymore, and so my operational costs will shrink automatically. They do not shrink automatically. You still have to plan your capacity intelligently. And now, of course, within AWS, there's CloudWatch, which helps you to do this. For Azure, I highly recommend a tool called a CloudEye, which is CloudYN, to help you monitor your spend, which is key. Multi-cloud is almost inevitable. I mean, there may be organizations that that will say, well, we're going to commit entirely to one cloud platform. But multi-cloud is absolutely, in my experience anyway, is the direction of most organizations, because they'll find that they have different needs. And so a platform like CloudEye, I think, gives you the ability to have an overall view of your cloud investment and to have a management of that spend.
I think these were all the questions that we got during the session. I'd like to thank you, Dwayne, for the presentation. It's been really, really amazing.
Yes, thank you very much, and thank you everyone for attending. And Move to the cloud. That's my message to everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. Just to wrap up a little bit, this session will be on cloudacademy.com/webinars very soon with all the previous sessions that we had. And you can message us on our channels. If you have additional questions, reach us out at our community at cloudacademy.com/community, and we'll make sure to answer your questions. As Dwayne mentioned during the webinar, we at Cloud Academy also we have courses in Azure, and then we can help and your team or you to get to know more about cloud migration as well. Thank you, Dwayne.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, so this is Diego at Cloud Academy. Until next time, keep building amazing things in the cloud. Bye for now. Bye, Dwayne.
Bye-bye.